The handcuffs clicked shut at 6:23 a.m. on September 16, 2025, 13 years after Isabella Rosetti performed her final dance at the prestigious Whitmore Academy of Performing Arts in Richmond, Virginia. When FBI agents led away 58-year-old Professor Jonathan Whitmore, the Academy's celebrated founder and artistic director, the gasps of horror could be heard from the marble steps of the state capitol to the rehearsal studios where 3 generations of dancers had learned to trust him with their dreams. Professor Whitmore wasn't just Richmond's most respected dance instructor. He was a legend, the man who had trained prima ballerinas for the American Ballet Theater, who had choreographed pieces performed at Lincoln Center, and who had turned his small Virginia academy into one of the most elite dance schools on the East Coast. He was also the man who had led the search for Bella when she vanished, who had comforted her devastated parents, and who had established a scholarship in her name. But as the FBI would reveal in the shocking indictment that followed, Professor Jonathan Whitmore had been hiding the most twisted secret in the dance world's history. Isabella Rosetti was 19 years old when she disappeared on December 14, 2012. She was everything the dance world celebrated, breathtakingly beautiful with flowing black hair and liquid brown eyes, technically perfect with the kind of natural grace that couldn't be taught, and ambitious enough to sacrifice everything for her art. Bella had been dancing since she was 3 years old, progressing through local studios in her hometown of Norfolk before earning a full scholarship to the Whitmore Academy at age 16. She was Professor Whitmore's star pupil, the dancer everyone knew would make it to the top. Ballet magazines had already featured her as a rising star to watch, and scouts from major companies attended her performances regularly. But Bella was more than just a talented dancer. She was a young woman with a fierce intelligence, a wicked sense of humor, and a loyalty to her fellow dancers that made her beloved throughout the academy. She tutored struggling students, organized fundraisers for those who couldn't afford proper equipment, and served as an unofficial counselor for homesick dancers far from their families. On the night she vanished, Bella had been preparing for the Academy's Winter Showcase, a prestigious event that would determine which dancers would be invited to audition for major ballet companies the following spring. She had been rehearsing her solo, a breathtaking interpretation of The Dying Swan that had moved audiences to tears during previous performances. Bella's roommate at the Academy dormitory, Sarah Chun, was the last person to see her alive. Sarah later told investigators that Bella had seemed excited but nervous about her upcoming performance. She had mentioned wanting to practice her solo one more time before bed, despite the late hour. She said she felt like something was missing from the piece, Sarah recalled years later. She wanted it to be perfect. She always wanted everything to be perfect. Security footage from the Academy showed Bella entering Studio A, the largest rehearsal space, at 11:47 p.m. on December 13, 2012. She was wearing her signature black leotard and pink point shoes, her hair pulled back in the tight bun required for all Academy classes. The footage showed her warming up at the bar, stretching with the methodical precision that had made her famous among her peers. At 12:15 a.m., she moved to the center of the studio and began practicing her solo, her movements flowing like water, each gesture expressing the profound emotion of a swan's final moments. At 12:43 a.m., someone entered the studio. The camera angle didn't clearly show who it was, but Bella stopped dancing and walked toward the entrance, apparently recognizing whoever had arrived. That was the last time Isabella Rosetti was seen alive. When Bella failed to appear for her 8 a.m. ballet technique class the following morning, her instructor initially assumed she was ill. But when Sarah checked their dorm room and found Bella's bed unslept in, alarm bells began ringing throughout the academy. Professor Whitmore himself led the initial search of the academy buildings. He checked every studio, every practice room, every storage closet where a dancer might have fallen asleep after a late rehearsal. When the search expanded to the surrounding grounds, he organized student volunteers and contacted local police. Professor Whitmore seemed more devastated than anyone, recalled Detective Maria Santos, who was assigned to the case. He kept saying that Bella was like a daughter to him, that he couldn't understand how she could just disappear from his academy. He was crying genuine tears, or at least, they seemed genuine at the time. The investigation that followed was extensive and immediate. The Richmond Police Department, recognizing that a young woman's disappearance from an elite academy would attract significant media attention, assigned their best detectives to the case. The FBI was brought in within 48 hours due to the possibility that Bella had been transported across state lines. Investigators interviewed every student, instructor, and staff member at the academy. They reviewed hundreds of hours of security footage, analyzed phone records, and conducted extensive searches of the academy grounds and surrounding areas. They found no evidence of forced entry, no signs of struggle, and no indication that Bella had planned to leave voluntarily. The security footage from Studio A became the focus of intense scrutiny. Digital forensics experts enhanced the images, trying to identify the person who had entered at 12:43 a.m. But the figure remained frustratingly indistinct, tall, wearing dark clothing, moving with the confident stride of someone familiar with the academy layout. What investigators did determine was that whoever entered the studio had used a key. There were no signs that the door had been forced, and the academy's electronic lock system showed that it had been properly unlocked with a valid access card. This revelation was particularly troubling because access to the studios after midnight was restricted to faculty members and a handful of senior staff. Only 12 people at the academy possessed the necessary keycards, and all of them were thoroughly investigated. Professor Whitmore, as the academy's founder and director, was among those questioned extensively. But his alibi seemed solid. He claimed to have been at home with his wife, reviewing choreography notes for the winter showcase. His wife corroborated his story, and there was no evidence to contradict their account. The case began attracting national attention when Bella's story was featured on major news programs. The image of a beautiful young ballerina vanishing from an elite academy captured public imagination, and tips poured in from across the country. Unfortunately, none of the leads proved credible. Bella's parents, Anthony and Maria Rosetti, became public faces of the search effort. They traveled from Norfolk to Richmond weekly, posting flyers, organizing volunteer searches, and pleading for any information about their daughter's whereabouts. Professor Whitmore stood beside them at press conferences, his voice breaking with emotion as he described Bella as the most promising dancer I've ever had the privilege to teach. He established the Isabella Rosetti Memorial Scholarship, providing full tuition for one deserving student each year. But as weeks turned into months with no breaks in the case, investigators began to consider the possibility that Bella was dead. The lack of communication, the complete absence of evidence that she had left voluntarily, and the mysterious circumstances of her disappearance all pointed toward foul play. The case officially went cold in 2014, though Bella's family never stopped searching for answers. They hired private investigators, consulted with psychics, and followed up on every possible lead. Professor Whitmore remained supportive throughout their ordeal, often calling to check on them and attending memorial services held in Bella's honor. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh joined the FBI's Cold Case Unit in 2020, 8 years after Bella's disappearance. Walsh specialized in cases involving missing young women, and she brought both advanced investigative techniques and a fresh perspective to cases that had stalled years earlier. Walsh's review of the Isabella Rosetti case began in early 2024, focusing on evidence that might not have been properly analyzed using modern forensic methods. She was particularly interested in the security footage from Studio A, which she believed might contain more information than previous investigators had been able to extract. Using artificial intelligence-enhanced video analysis, technology that hadn't existed in 2012, Walsh was able to create a much clearer image of the person who had entered the studio on the night of Bella's disappearance. The enhanced footage revealed distinctive physical characteristics: a slight limp favoring the left leg, an unusual way of opening doors with the left hand while keeping the right hand in a pocket, and most importantly, a partial view of a distinctive watch. The watch became the breakthrough Walsh needed. It was a limited edition Patek Philippe timepiece, one of only 500 made for the company's 175th anniversary. Walsh obtained records from authorized dealers and discovered that only 3 of these watches had been sold in the Richmond area between 2010 and 2012. One of those watches had been purchased by Professor Jonathan Whitmore. This discovery prompted Walsh to take a much closer look at Whitmore's background and his relationship with his students. What she found disturbed her profoundly. While Whitmore's public reputation was impeccable, Walsh discovered a pattern of complaints that had been quietly suppressed over the years. Several former students had reported inappropriate behavior, touching during private lessons that went beyond necessary corrections, comments about their bodies that made them uncomfortable, and requests for private meetings that seemed to have no legitimate educational purpose. Most of these complaints had been handled internally by the Academy's board of directors, who were reluctant to damage the reputation of their most successful instructor. The complaints were quietly resolved with confidentiality agreements, and the students who made them often found themselves encouraged to transfer to other schools or programs. Walsh also discovered that Bella herself had confided concerns to several classmates about Professor Whitmore's behavior in the months before her disappearance. Sarah Chen, her roommate, revealed in a new interview that Bella had mentioned feeling uncomfortable during private coaching sessions. She said he would stand too close, touch her more than necessary to make corrections, Sarah told Walsh. She felt like he was watching her differently than he watched other students. But she was afraid to complain because she knew it could end her career. Armed with this new information, Walsh obtained search warrants for Whitmore's home and office. What she found there provided the final pieces of the puzzle that had remained unsolved for 13 years. Hidden in Whitmore's personal safe were dozens of photographs of Bella taken without her knowledge, images captured during private rehearsals, in the Academy dormitory, and even in her personal room. There were also handwritten notes documenting her daily routines, her relationships with other students, and detailed observations about her physical development. But the most damning evidence was found in Whitmore's private computer, a folder containing dozens of videos of young dancers in compromising positions, including several featuring Bella that had been recorded using hidden cameras installed throughout the Academy. DNA evidence collected from these materials matched genetic material found on Bella's dance bag, which had been recovered from Studio A the morning after her disappearance but hadn't yielded usable DNA evidence with the technology available in 2012. Confronted with this overwhelming evidence, Whitmore initially continued to maintain his innocence. But as additional evidence mounted, including financial records showing he had paid for extensive renovations to his property in early 2013, shortly after Bella's disappearance, his story began to crumble. The confession came during Whitmore's fourth interrogation session with Agent Walsh and Richmond police detectives. After 13 years of living with his secret, Professor Jonathan Whitmore finally revealed what had happened to Isabella Rosetti on December 14, 2012. According to Whitmore's confession, he had become obsessed with Bella from the moment she arrived at the Academy. Her talent, beauty, and dedication had captivated him, and over time his admiration had twisted into something much darker. On the night of her disappearance, Whitmore claimed he had gone to Studio A to discuss Bella's upcoming performance and her future career opportunities. But when he attempted to proposition her, offering to guarantee her placement with a major ballet company in exchange for sexual favors, Bella had reacted with disgust and anger. She threatened to expose him, to tell everyone about his inappropriate behavior toward students. In his panic and rage, Whitmore struck her, causing her to fall and hit her head on the studio's hardwood floor. Whitmore confessed to disposing of Bella's body in a remote area of Virginia's Shenandoah National Park, where it had never been recovered despite extensive searches. He had spent the early morning hours of December 14th transporting her body and eliminating evidence from the studio. The confession explained the meticulous planning that had allowed Whitmore to avoid suspicion for 13 years. His position as Academy director had given him access to security footage, which he had edited to remove clear images of himself entering Studio A. His reputation in the community had made him seem above suspicion, and his participation in the search efforts had been a calculated move to monitor the investigation. The arrest of Professor Jonathan Whitmore sent shockwaves through the dance world that reverberated from Richmond to Broadway. For 13 years, the dance community had mourned Isabella Rosetti as a talented young artist whose life had been cut short by unknown circumstances. The revelation that she had been murdered by her most trusted mentor, a man who had built his career on nurturing young talent, shattered the sense of safety that parents had felt when sending their daughters to elite dance academies. Anthony and Maria Rosetti, now in their 60s, finally had answers to the questions that had tormented them for over a decade. But the truth brought a mixture of relief and devastating sorrow. "We trusted him with our daughter's dreams," Maria Rosetti said at the press conference announcing the arrest. "We believed he cared about her future, about her success. Instead, he stole everything from her. Her life, her career, her chance to become the dancer she was meant to be." The trial of Professor Jonathan Whitmore began in June 2025 and lasted 8 weeks. The prosecution, led by Commonwealth's attorney Robert Martinez, presented a methodical case built on digital evidence, DNA analysis, witness testimony from former students, and Whitmore's own confession. The defense team attempted to argue that the confession had been coerced and that Whitmore was being framed by someone seeking to destroy his reputation. They presented character witnesses who testified to Whitmore's dedication to his students and his contributions to the dance community. But the jury wasn't convinced by the defense arguments. The physical evidence was overwhelming, and testimony from former students painted a clear picture of predatory behavior that had escalated over many years. After deliberating for 6 hours, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all charges: first-degree murder, sexual exploitation of a minor, and destruction of evidence. Judge Sarah Williams sentenced Professor Jonathan Whitmore to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At 58 years old, Whitmore will spend the remainder of his life behind bars for crimes that had remained hidden for 13 years. During the sentencing hearing, several of Whitmore's former students testified about the abuse they had suffered under his instruction. Their testimony revealed a pattern of exploitation that had affected dozens of young dancers over the decades. Rachel Morrison, no relation to our previous case, now a professional dancer with the New York City Ballet, addressed the court directly. "Professor Whitmore taught us to trust him completely, to submit to his authority without question. He used that trust to exploit us, to steal our innocence and our sense of safety. Bella paid the ultimate price for trying to resist him." She continued, "The dance world failed Bella and all of us by protecting a predator's reputation instead of protecting his victims. Her death must serve as a wake-up call for systemic changes in how we train and protect young artists." The Whitmore Academy of Performing Arts closed permanently following the trial. The building has been sold to a nonprofit organization that provides counseling and support services for victims of abuse in artistic communities. Isabella Rosetti's legacy lives on through the Bella Rosetti Foundation, established by her parents to support young dancers while advocating for safer training environments. The foundation has pushed for legislative changes requiring background checks and oversight for dance instructors, as well as mandatory reporting procedures for suspected abuse. Bella's death wasn't meaningless if it helps protect other young dancers, Anthony Rosetti said at the foundation's annual gala. "She loved dance more than anything in the world. Through this foundation, her passion can continue to inspire and protect the next generation of artists." The case has become a landmark in the ongoing conversation about abuse of power in artistic communities. It has highlighted the vulnerability of young performers who depend on influential mentors for their career advancement, and the ways predators can use that dependence to exploit and silence their victims. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a psychologist specializing in abuse in artistic communities, consulted on the case and its broader implications. The Bella Rosetti case illustrates how institutional protection of reputation can enable predatory behavior to continue unchecked. When complaints are handled internally and confidentially, patterns of abuse remain hidden, and predators are free to continue targeting new victims. The dance world has implemented significant changes in response to Bella's case. Major dance companies and schools have established independent reporting systems for abuse allegations, mandatory training programs for faculty and staff, and regular oversight from child protection professionals. As of today, September 17, 2025, Professor Jonathan Whitmore remains in Virginia State Prison, where he is serving his life sentence. He has shown no remorse for his crimes and has refused to reveal the exact location of Bella's remains, depriving her family of the closure that comes with laying their loved one to rest. The case serves as a stark reminder that artistic genius and predatory behavior can coexist, that positions of authority in creative fields can be weaponized against vulnerable young people, and that the pursuit of artistic excellence must never come at the cost of basic human safety and dignity. Isabella Rosetti was 19 years old when her life was stolen by someone she trusted. Her dreams of dancing on the world's greatest stages died with her in a rehearsal studio where she should have been safe. But her memory lives on as a catalyst for change, a reminder that protecting young artists is more important than protecting institutional reputations. The dance world will never be the same, but it will continue to evolve, to improve, and to ensure that Isabella Rossetti's story serves as both a warning and a call to action for communities everywhere that train and nurture young talent.